Good afternoon, students. I wanted to go over some of the test questions in a little bit more detail, and specifically question 7. That was the one that dealt with the iNamed interface and the abstract class plant and the daylily, the rose, the striking tiger, breathtaker, all of those. Put them into a list and then generated some output after invoking the grow method on them. Now, really, what this is all about and why I give you this particular question is I want to make sure that you really understand the concepts of inheritance and how it actually happens in C sharp, and specifically what the difference between the abstract methods, virtual methods, and new methods and properties really are. And in part, the reason I have to emphasize this is C Sharp allows you to do some things that other object-oriented languages do not allow you to do. And I would actually argue that some of the things it allows you to do are actually not great ideas. They really shouldn't have put this into the language. It just really breaks some of the concepts of object orientation. One of the big ones is the new keyword. And what the new keyword does is it defines a new method with the same name that exists in the base class. So in this case, the daylily or the rose, they both define a name property. Now the rose does not declare its name as virtual or abstract, and that means it cannot be overridden. If you create a derived class and you want to give it a different name property, you have to use the new keyword, which means that when you're treating it as a daylily, it's going to use the daylily's name, and when you treat it as a striking tiger, because this is new, it's going to use the striking tiger's name. And that's really the important thing that this output shows you, is that the name it's printing is going to depend on how you're actually treating that object. Are you treating it as a plant? Are you treating it as a daylily? Are you treating it as a striking tiger? And the same thing for methods. Methods work exactly the same way. So if it is a new method, then that new method will be used when you treat it as a heartbreaker. But if you treat it as a rose, it's going to use the existing method of the rose, which rose doesn't have that method. It's defined in plant, so it's going to use the virtual grow that's defined in the base class. Whereas if you use an override, like we do on the Sleeping Beauty, that means no matter if we're treating it as a rose, a plant, or Sleeping Beauty, we're going to use this version. And that's really the ideal. That's what object orientation is supposed to be. Whenever we inherit from a base class, we should be using a overridden method to replace its functionality all the way down the chain. That is the most clear way that this should work, and that's how most object-oriented languages try to do it. Now Java and C++ and .NET introduce some variations on that where they'll allow, for example, abstract or virtual, and C# goes a step farther and allows the new keyword, which like I said, I don't really care for. I think it was a bad design practice for the language. They tried to make the language as flexible as possible, and in some ways that's a real disservice to programmers in the .NET world, because you can introduce some very serious bugs by doing that people don't. If you don't understand the implications of using that new keyword, you're going to really make some bad design decisions. And that's why we hammer it so hard on the exam. So let's talk our way through. We create a list of plants. So our list is of type plant. And then when we pull our plants off that list, we are treating them as plants. That's the important thing. So we're not treating these as their own class. We're treating them all as plants. So we're going to use the plant variant of everything unless there's an override. And then we invoke grow twice. Then we go ahead and cast, explicit cast, plant as iNamed, and since all the plants use that iNamed interface, well, the daylily and the rose do, so our two base classes, we can treat it as that. So here it's treated as an iNamed. So we have two arguments we're doing here. The first is we're calling the name of the iNamed object, and the second we're calling the plant's growth stage. And the plant is also, we're invoking the grow. So let's look at the daylily. Daylily is our first one. If we look at our daylily, right here, daylily inherits from plant, implements the INamed interface. So right away, the name we're going to use is a name defined here, which is daylily, and the grow method is going to be the one we inherited from plant. So this grow, and the grow stage is going to be the one we inherited from plant. So very straightforward. Everybody got that one right. Rows is the same thing. We're going to use this name property that's defined here in the rows, and we're going to use the growth stage and grow methods that are defined here. So those two were fairly straightforward. Now we get into the interesting cases, the striking tiger. Now notice we use the new keyword. So we've declared a new version of name that's used when we treat this as a daylily. But when we use the INamed interface, we're treating it as an INamed. Notice the INamed is implemented on the daylily level. So it's going to treat it as a daylily, which means we're going to use the name daylily. We're not going to use striking tiger, even though that exists there. And then the grow, again, the daylily, we're not overriding grow, and we're not overriding growth stage. We're going to use those out of the base class of plant. So that will work exactly the same as the others. Sleeping Beauty, similar deal, except we are now overriding that grow method. So in this case, when we say plant grow, because it's an override, we're going to actually trigger the overridden grow. So our grow is going to take our current stage and add 2 to it. Our stage starts at 0, so we get 2 and then 4, because we call grow twice. And then because that's changing that base private or protected variable, we know that when we return that, that's what we're returning is the 4. So this will actually grow and spit out 4, and then its name is still going to be daylily because we didn't actually override the name of the daylily in the Sleeping Beauty. Then Breathtaker, we have a rose. Again, we're using new, so we're not going to use that. We're going to use the base class, so we're going to use the name of rose, and we didn't do anything with the grow or growth stage, so it's going to be the default. We're going to get 2. And the same with the Heartbreaker. Here we're actually overriding the name. This is the first time we've overridden the name property, so that means that we will use this name no matter if we're treating it as a plant, no matter if we're treating it as a rose. So we're going to actually pull out Heartbreaker there. And then the growth stage, notice that we have declared a new growth stage property that just returns a 5. But it is a new growth stage, and here we're treating it as a plant, so we use the same ones out of the plant, and we've done grow twice as a plant, so it would actually still be 4. So that's really the big thing I want you to take away from here, is that the difference between overriding a method or a property and using the new keyword with a method and property. If you override, you're using it all the way down the chain. So no matter what you're treating that object as, you're going to use the overridden method or the overridden property. If you're using new, that means at that stage you've created a brand new method or property that has nothing to do other than it shares the name with the prior one and does not replace that. So if you're treating it as a base level, it's going to use that base level method. All right, that wraps up our discussion on that issue. So we'll see you in class.